Problem hijacking may not be a phrase that you've heard before, but it's a common problem, ironically. In this video, we are going to explore 1. How problem hijacking sometimes allows cynical people to get benefits for themselves at the expense of most other people. 2. What problem hijacking is and the 3 ingredients of problem hijacking. And 3. What you can do about it. What is problem hijacking? Problem hijacking occurs when 1. There is a real problem that needs to be solved. 2. People selfishly try to exploit that problem for their own benefit by taking advantage of the side effects of a claimed solution while intentionally producing a worse result overall. And 3. Often, those people try to stifle questioning of their solution by falsely claiming that questioning the solution is the same thing as doubting that the problem is real or not caring about solving it. Let's break that down. The first thing that problem hijacking needs is a real, genuine problem. If somebody's inventing a problem that doesn't exist at all, that's dishonest. But that's not problem hijacking. It's the realness of the problem that makes this form of abuse so effective. And there's no limit to what kind of problem can be exploited in this way. Let's take a hypothetical example, which we'll use to illustrate the point throughout this video. Let's imagine that the problem is that lots of people are selling bad quality food and it's making people ill. If that were happening, that would definitely be a real problem and one that any good person would want to be solved. The next and most important ingredient in the recipe for problem hijacking is the hijacked solution. We can actually break that down further. First of all, the motive, and then the purported solution itself. The motive is what motivates the cynical people to hijack the problem. In theory, it could be anything, but it usually boils down to a desire to use coercion to get more wealth or power for themselves in a way that tends to make things worse overall for other people. Let's turn back to our example. Let's imagine that there are a group of food producers who would like to make a much higher profit margin on what they sell, but can't because there's too much competition in the market. They couldn't just say, "We want to make a higher profit margin, therefore, people shouldn't be allowed to compete with us," because very few people would support that. It would be in almost nobody's interests for that to happen. So instead, what they do is hijack a problem, such as in our example, the problem of people selling bad food. The hijacked solution is something that claims to be a solution to a real problem, but has actually been imposed because the people imposing it want to exploit what looks like a side effect. In reality, it's not a side effect at all. It's actually the main reason for imposing the measure in the first place. But it's disguised as a side effect to deceive people into not opposing it. With a hijacked problem, the people imposing the measure don't care if the world is a better place overall with the so-called solution in place, or whether the world could be a much better place with a less coercive or intrusive solution. It will only be good luck if the hijacked solution is actually the best way of dealing with the problem, and usually it isn't. Let's go back to our example again. Remember, there's a real problem. People are selling bad food and making people ill. The cynical producers who want more profit might exploit this problem by doing something like this. They might lobby the government to introduce a new rule that only people who have been approved by the government are allowed to sell any food at all. This, they might claim, would make sure that only people who sell good food are allowed to sell food, solving the problem. They might suggest that they should help the government to do the hard work of designing the organization that decides who should be allowed to sell food. They might volunteer to be a part of this organization and do so for much less money than anyone independent would charge. When they're designing it, they would make sure that the organization only issues a small number of licenses to a few producers, drastically reducing competition in the marketplace. This would allow them to make a much higher profit margin than before. Here, the side effect is the reduction in competition and the increase in prices. This is what the people, the cynical food producers who want to increase their profit margins, actually want. It's not a side effect for them. It's their main aim. And they don't need to go anything like this far to solve the real problem. The government is not likely to complain about this. After all, if the food producers are making higher margins, it can charge them all more tax. And anything that a government can do to get more tax revenue without being seen to increase tax rates will always be popular with politicians. So the politicians have a strong incentive to collude with the cynical food producers in this example. They are hijackers too. But you mustn't assume that every time that somebody who tries to solve a problem has a collateral motive for doing so is engaging in problem hijacking. A person's job might be solving a particular kind of problem. That person's motive to solve the problems may be to get paid, rather than because he or she wants the problem solved. But that by itself doesn't make the person a problem hijacker. Only if the person didn't care whether the solution were the best one and were trying to exploit a potentially harmful side effect would this be problem hijacking. Back to our example. Notice that the food licensing scheme might actually solve the problem. It might actually mean that there is less bad food being sold and that fewer people are getting ill. That makes it much more difficult for people to oppose this form of solution, and that's part of what the hijackers are banking on. And this is part of the third and final ingredient in our problem hijacking recipe: scrutiny suppression, making it hard for people to question the solution. It's not an absolutely essential ingredient. It's possible to do problem hijacking without it, but the two most often go together. What problem hijackers will often do is try to claim that anybody who disagrees with the solution doesn't care about the problem or doesn't want it to be solved, even when that's not true. They do this because they usually know that if the hijacked solution were compared rigorously with other, less coercive solutions, it would be very hard to show why the level of coercion is justified. The hijackers would be outed, and the side effects that they want would be at risk. Turning back to our food example, if someone were to say, "Food is too expensive. There's no reason for so few people to be allowed to sell food." A hijacker might say, if we didn't have the licensing scheme in place, people would just be able to get away with selling bad food and making people ill. That's what happened before we had it. Do you want to go back to the bad old days? If you look carefully at the hijacker's argument, you'll see a flaw. The hijacker assumes that there is no other possible solution to the problem, one that doesn't have the harmful, exploited side effect. Without that assumption, the argument isn't valid. The hijackers are likely to deny that any other solution could possibly work, usually without any evidence at all. But notice, the nature of this particular hijacked solution is such that it makes it very difficult to test whether any other solution would work. It is so coercive that it crowds out all alternatives. So long as it remains in place, we can never see whether a less coercive system, one which does not stifle competition, would be just as effective or even more effective at stopping bad food from being sold. Very often, this is just what the hijackers are banking on. This is often designed into a hijacked solution on purpose. It's part of the abuse. So, how do we deal with the problem of problem hijacking? Problem hijacking relies on people not questioning something that appears to be a solution to a real problem, not asking whether there might be a better solution that has fewer side effects. If enough people were to doubt or question things taken for granted, it would be much harder to get away with problem hijacking. This is especially so where more coercion than is strictly necessary seems to be being used even when there's a real problem to be solved, and where some, the people who are promoting that coercion, might stand to gain by it. Never trust people who claim that a problem can't be solved by any other means if they can't clearly explain how they know this if the alternatives have not been tested. And if you remember only one thing from this video, remember this: Criticizing a particular claimed solution to the problem is not the same as not caring about solving the problem. You can want a problem to be solved at the same time as not agreeing with a particular thing that is claimed to be a solution to it, and so can anyone else. The less problem hijacking that there is in the world, the better that real problems can be solved. And the more people who know what problem hijacking is and how to spot it, the harder that it will be for people to get away with this form of abuse. Can you think of any real-world examples of problem hijacking? If so, let us know in the comments, share to let other people know about problem hijacking, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this one.